It's Stephen Hale here. I've got my banner colleague, Sarah Grace Taylor, who may have come straight from the Metro Planning Commission.
Not exactly, but close enough.
Close. We're going to talk about that meeting. It was 6 hours? Was it 6 hours long about?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about why it lasted that long, what they talked about, why someone was dressed as a giraffe in the gallery. But first, I have a question for you, which is, what's one of your top zoo memories? Nashville or anywhere?
Oh.
One of your top memories at a zoo,
That's a good question.
if you have one.
No, yeah. And it was probably Grassmere just because I grew up here. And it's kind of messed up because I don't think they should do this and they don't do it anymore. But you used to be able to ride the elephants at Grassmere when I was like 5.
Yeah, they don't even have elephants anymore,
Yeah.
which I think is the right call.
Yeah. And by the way, animals shouldn't have jobs and that whole thing was messed up. But at 5, pretty cool.
Thrilling.
Yeah.
Actually, the memory that comes to mind for me on this has a similar theme, which is, in hindsight, it makes me a little sad. But I was at, I want to say, the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago.
Which is phenomenal.
Yeah, and they have they had gorillas, and they have gorilla glass, so-called, and I remember being fascinated with this. Like, you're telling me this glass could not be broken by anything? And I am looking at the gorillas, put my face up to the glass. This gorilla comes up and just punches the glass like right at me, and here I am today. It worked. But now when I think back on it, I'm like, that's probably because that gorilla did not want to be in an enclosure, and it's a gorilla that's basically smarter than me. And so the reason the zoo came to mind is because the zoo's at the center of like the biggest topic of conversation and news in Nashville right now, which is this data center that has been planned next to it. But you were writing about data centers before the zoo was writing about data centers and putting out petitions about them. So I want to start there. Like, why are we even talking about this at all? And why did you start writing about data centers? And then we can work our way to last night.
Yeah, so I started writing about data centers a few weeks ago after Fisk University in North Nashville announced their campus plan that included a data center, which is pretty controversial because it's right in the middle of a neighborhood. It's on campus. It's right next to a public housing project. And there's not been a lot of community input. There's not been a lot of transparency around who they're going to partner with. And then there's all the standard data center concerns, which I'm sure no one needs me to go over. But basically, environmental impact, noise, public health, all the things that come with data centers. It being in a neighborhood like North Nashville that's primarily black and a historic neighborhood on a historic campus particularly makes people concerned about poor development because the interstate that ran right through the same neighborhood and other kind of predatory development.
There's some concern about history repeating itself. And yeah, to your point, people have maybe seen all the discussion of data centers around the country, but in Tennessee, there's the data center in Memphis that has been getting a lot of coverage and discussion, and particularly about these things being placed in minority communities or, predominantly black communities, and the negative effects being sort of disproportionately landing on them.
Enter another one planned next to the zoo in South Nashville.
Yes. The
other majority-minority neighborhood in Nashville. And of course, next to a zoo, I've said this to a bunch of people this week, but like my very apolitical sister-in-law, who is a mom of 3, is like sharing a petition on Facebook and being involved in a way I've literally known her for 15 years and never seen her say anything political.
Yeah.
And she's like pissed off about the zoo one because it's the zoo. So you bring animals into it and suddenly it
has broken containment, as we say. Like the zoo put out this petition, which at first when I saw this going around, I had to click through and be like, this is literally from the zoo. Is this actually, and it is. This is the zoo itself put out this petition saying we don't want this data center built and you can help us by signing this petition. I think it's over 300,000 people have signed it now, or I don't know what the current count is. But yeah, it's been going everywhere. It's all over social media. Before we get deeper into the zoo, which was discussed at length last night.
And by the way, not what the meeting was about, but yeah.
Going back to the story you wrote related to the Fisk project, you also, because as you said, people are probably caught up on the data centers topic if you're the sort of person who's going to listen to this podcast, you've probably been seeing a lot about it. But you also had a map in there about the other data centers that are already here. And because I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, because this is a new-ish topic in the sense that it's like a top of mind for everyone. But these data centers, there's already a bunch around. There were some years ago. They're maybe connected to different technology or different companies or whatever. But tell me about the map that you had and like what other ones are already existing.
Yeah, so there's the number I keep hearing is 27 data centers in Middle Tennessee. I could verify something like 24 of those and put them on a map based on their size and on their capacity. So size being like literal footprint of the facility, capacity being like what megawatt of energy and data do they have going on. There's a lot of small ones that have existed for a long time, and Doug Sloan, who's an attorney for DC Blocks, the company trying to build this data center next to the zoo, made a point when we talked last night to say, like, there are different kinds of data center. People picture, like you said, the Memphis one, which is enormous and, of course, has, because it's so large, higher impact on the environment and
that's
community.
An XAI one? Or
Yeah, of course it's Elon.
Connected to Elon Musk, so
Sure,
that
sure.
brings a whole nother level of discussion to it.
Yeah, but it also is fueling AI, which people have feelings about. So that's like all of the things people worry about. It is for lack of a better word, worst example that you could think of. So the DC Blocks attorney is telling me, well, they're not all the same. And there are some that are like 1, 3, 5, like single digit megawatt facilities that have been around. Some of them store like health data and are just like an old technology that's been in our neighborhood for a long time. You wouldn't know. And then some of them are looking at being hundreds of megawatts in these large campus style ones. And part of why the reason why this discussion happened at this meeting yesterday is because City Council member Roland Horton introduced a zoning bill that would categorize these differently by size and would also restrict where they can go relative to like schools and churches and that kind of thing, residential neighborhoods, based on their size, and would require a certain distance between them so that you couldn't do a cluster of small data centers right next to each other, though that part might change. And so this whole discussion yesterday wasn't about the Fisk one per se, wasn't about the zoo. It was about this piece of planning legislation. But because it's so hot button and people are so invested in both those communities, it became like a referendum on should there even be any development of data centers in Nashville.
Yeah, and I mean, we can't emphasize enough that this, you've been to a lot of public hearings and meetings, and I have, and it's funny, we're doing this right after our last episode talking to Stephen Elliott about a long public hearing on the budget. But I mean, it's pretty rare to see something like last night. The amount of people that showed up there and waited in line to talk is not, I mean, that's, so the enthusiasm is the wrong word maybe, but like the energy behind this is real. It's people are really coming out for it. And like you say, it's tied up in a lot of things, right? Because some of these data centers are about AI. Some of them aren't. They're just, some of the ones that were already existing were kind of like, it's Amazon Web Services needs a data center, Meta, Facebook, whatever. Which
are not exactly benevolent.
Yes, people don't. Not everyone loves those either. But like the AI, I feel like this conversation has really been juiced by the debate about AI, and so people are already having these conversations about AI, and now they learn that a giant data center is being built to fuel it, and it leads to that. And people brought that up last night too.
Yeah, and you mentioned the number of people, and I guess I should kind of set the scene. So this is a planning commission meeting, which are usually like, there's maybe some people complaining about a housing development in their neighborhood, but it's not going to be even like council or even like the state legislature where you might see a couple dozen people show up to an interesting meeting. And there were hundreds of people who showed up. The meeting was so full before it ever started at 4:00 that the fire marshal made people go wait outside at one point. And then people were like cycling into the room when they did public comment. And it was like 90 degrees and people were just sitting outside sweating and happy to come talk about the zoo. And so they waited for hours and hours. And there were like more than 5 hours of public comment ultimately. And to the Planning Commission's credit, they said, hey, everyone who showed up can have 2 minutes. We're not going to cut it off, which is, sometimes governments will cut off the number of people who can talk or like the number of hours they're going to spend on something.
Mm-hmm.
But there were so many first-time public commenters. There were so many people who were like, I don't go to these meetings. I don't like public speaking. And there were 10-year-olds who were going to camp at the zoo. And there was a lady old enough that she said, I remember when doctors said cigarettes were okay for you. And like, the range of people was not like what I usually see at a public meeting that's busy, where it's like the usual suspects who care about public policy. It was just everybody.
Yeah. And that gets back to your point before about how this has broken out beyond the people who are normally, this wasn't just the people who have the Metro Nashville Network streaming app on their phone to watch meetings. Like, this was beyond, that, and a lot of people have heard about this. So, what are some of the things that stood out to you? We should get to how the meeting ended, or what the decision or not was of how the meeting ended. But like,
that's easy. It was deferred.
What stood out? Yeah. What stood out to you though about the public hearing? Like, and I asked because there were a couple of comments in particular that I still remember that really stood out to me. Things people had to say, but like, what did you?
I mean, like I said, the range of people who showed up was abnormal. Literally, children testifying is abnormal. I think also the number of people who didn't take their whole time because they're not the typical grandstanders, which shout out if you talked for less than 2 minutes. Everybody came to say, and when I say everybody, I mean all but one person who spoke came to support the idea of this regulation.
So there was someone, because I didn't see that. I watched a good bit of the meeting. I confess, I did not watch the whole thing. And I was wondering.
You should read NashvilleBanner.com.
Yeah, yes. People can read this story on NashvilleBanner.com. But let's go back to that then. Tell us about the one person who wasn't. You said everyone.
Well, I'll give you. There's one neutral and one, I would say, pro data center at the zoo. The neutral voice was Timothy Hughes, who's involved with the NAACP in Nashville and also Fisk's alumni group. And he came and kind of gave a neutral, like, Fisk is going to do it the right way, Fisk is going to be responsible about it perception, but even said he supported regulation on data centers generally. And then the person who was in favor of the zoo development was the man I mentioned earlier, Doug Sloan, an attorney for DC Blocks who's trying to build this facility. And he also said, theoretically, we want there to be regulations that make data centers come in the right way, but was mostly saying that the public is misinformed about data centers. They think that they're all like XAI in Memphis. And he said that DC Blocks employees have received death threats online. I did follow him out of the meeting and talk to him for a while afterward, and he couldn't give any more details of that. So I haven't seen anything like that, but theoretically this is happening. And he was just saying, like, no, we're going to be quiet. We're not going to be too loud for the animals. And no, we're going to do everything the right way. Don't worry about it. Which, if the only person showing up in favor of something is an attorney who's paid to represent that project, I would call that unanimous public input.
It's pretty clear. That we are going to talk about the person who was dressed as a giraffe, but
yay.
But before that, I mean, a couple of the comments stood out to me too. Is like one, and I'm forgetting this gentleman's name, but we actually were kind of messaging
Vibes
after
guy?
he talked because he said, basically he was just like, a lot of people have talked about the concerns about data centers, but just on a vibes level, and it was kind of funny because of how he said it. But I thought what his comments got to the heart of this thing in a way, because he was like he was like, the vibes of this are off, and whether or not any individual concern about a data center is true in this case or true in any case, and we're still learning, these things are relatively new, so we don't know all the effects they could or couldn't have. He was like, no one's asking for this. There's not some public demand to have this. We're all getting online and seeing AI slop that is annoying, and this is connected to that. Everyone loves the zoo, and this potentially is bad for that. Like, he was just like, this, why are we doing this kind of?
Yeah.
And I feel like that is the reaction a lot of people have to data centers, AI more broadly, is like, okay, I don't know if this is the worst thing ever or not, but what is happening, and why is it all happening before I even know what's happening? And people talked about that too. They're like, this is this is happening much quicker than we can get our heads around it.
Yeah, and I think to that point about the speed, people felt that way about the idea of development primarily, but also commissioners mentioned some concern of like, we are passing this policy very quickly. And I think part of it, though they won't say that's why, is so the policy is in place before any of these proposed projects can get all their permitting in place. But yeah, it's all happening quickly, but that's because development is happening quickly, particularly in the U.S. And the U.S. has thousands of data centers now, where like China still has 400 or something. You know, we are rapidly growing, and there's a lot of argument of, is there even the air quote need? If we agree with what the tech industry says they need, is that even proportionate to how many we're building? And then there's a lack of study on the long-term health impacts. There's a lack of understanding among the community, even if what Doug Sloan is saying is true and like they're going to be a benevolent data center, the fact that the public doesn't know the difference and doesn't understand the technology makes it foreign and scary that it's happening this quickly.
Well, yeah, these things have become as much a symbol of something that is bothering people so as anything else. So like whatever's true about one specific instance, it's kind of more the symbolic part.
Which is, the vibes guy was funny because he said vibes, right? But he was actually saying like a pretty substantive thing, which is he feels like the city, and particularly because of it being in the state with very low regulations for business, is constantly having development, change, businesses come in that don't necessarily behoove people who live here and don't reflect what the people who live here want. And another person who says that he actually does commercial development for a living said that he opposes data centers because they're not even like the most beneficial public development they could do, and Nashville is not hurting to find people who want to develop here.
Yeah, he was like, we could be much choosier about this. Like, lots of people want to build things here, whether and he's like, I want to make money on building things, but this doesn't make sense in that framework either.
Another person compared it to building a house on a property of monopoly instead of a hotel. Like, you could just find something that was going to have bigger ROI ultimately than these data centers that are untested and maybe not needed.
Yeah, and that is the thing, right? It's like, and several people made this point because of it, this particular data center being located next to the zoo. People see, and as best I can tell, we have like one of the best zoo. I mean, we have a very good zoo. Like, they do a lot of great conservation programs. Like, people feel very warmly for the zoo, not just because of their personal memories, but because it seems to be doing this good work for animals and, endangered animals and all this. And so it's seen as this real public good in a way, like, and then you juxtapose that with something that it's hard for myself included, people to be real clear on what is this for? What is this doing for us? Why is this going to benefit me? Like, so yeah, people kept making that point over and over again.
Which, by the way, the companies doing this and Fisk aren't helping, because DC Blocks has not been very transparent about what it is they're going to be doing in there, what kind of business they're housing. And DC Blocks, to be clear, is a data center operator out of Atlanta that operates a lot of facilities like this. And so probably what's going to happen is a different company, not Meta necessarily because they're building a giant one in Gallatin, but a company like Meta or some tech company is going to use that space. Maybe a medical company, and it is something that seems more utilitarian.
Right.
But we don't know. They haven't said. Similarly, Fisk, you'd go, oh, it's the university. Maybe it's not that malicious. And yes, like they have educational needs. Yeah. But they're also working with a corporate partner who they won't identify from Silicon Valley, which gives people qualms because they're like, who's going to be doing what out of this facility? Yeah,
and again, just to your point, like someone mentioned the Tesla tunnel. They said this reminded them of that. Nashville has had many rounds of this where a new tech thing arrives, and before the government can have 3 meetings about it, it's happening. And so it's kind of like the conversation quickly goes from, should we do this, to do we need to make sure no more of this because it's already happening before they can, call a meeting about it.
Which is specifically complicated in Nashville because not only will that happen, and allegedly DC Blocks is already like cutting down trees and stuff in the property that they don't yet own, and it's kind of a mess. But also, as the commission discussed last night, they're worried about preemption from the state. So whatever the the Democrat-leaning city chooses to do, there's a really good chance that the state can intervene, even retroactively, and like make a policy that
you can't block.
And that's why an all-out moratorium is something that people were saying they were concerned about last night, because it's easier to overturn that in court. It's easier to have the state intervene or preempt them. So whatever this zoning policy ends up being, they want to get precise enough that it's harder for the state to take issue with, particularly because the state legislature did vote down like half a dozen data center regulation bills that came across their desk.
So this is just what I was about to ask you when you brought up the state, what the status of this issue is at the state level, and whether it came up much in the legislature this session, and it sounds like it did, yeah.
So they did pass one bill that looked regulatory on its surface, but actually allows data centers to basically have their own power source, like what's happening in Memphis. And so certainly people who are concerned about data centers didn't support that bill. And then there are, I think, 5 or 6 other bills that would have had more specific actual regulations on data centers coming to Tennessee, and none of those passed. So, that's not a surprise to anyone who pays the slightest attention to the state legislature, because they try to be pro-business. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's a concern to people who are concerned about data centers.
Right. One of the people who was concerned about data centers went to the meeting last night dressed as a giraffe.
Yes.
And I understand you spoke to her, and I just want to know more about that.
So her name's Chelsea. She didn't want her last name because she said she would get fired for being there. But she was wearing a giraffe onesie, holding a sign that said "Save Our Zoo." And for the time that Doug Sloan was in line to go speak and defend the zoo and then ultimately get booed for going over time, and it was kind of dramatic, she was sitting in a way where she was like right behind him from my vantage point. So I thought that was a fun juxtaposition of the two of them. Mm-hmm. But also, it was over 90 degrees, and she certainly had to wait outside for some portion of that, and she was wearing a giraffe onesie.
Wow.
And the commitment, kind of unmatched.
Shout out to Chelsea. And I'm just going to say, and this is neutral, whatever the issue, whatever side of whatever issue you're on, more people show up to more public meetings dressed as animals.
I was actually thinking this last night. So I was just moonlighting at Planning Commission. I don't cover Metro.
Yeah.
And I actually had some remorse.
But now you're going to go to all the Planning Commission meetings. I think that's what we were discussing before.
I had some remorse while I was sitting there. Like, the legislative session just ended, and then the second one ended. Why on earth did I volunteer to go sit in a long meeting? I did this to myself.
You were jonesing for some more discussion.
The legislature has very strict rules and are very strict about enforcing, like, you can't have a sign bigger than an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and you can't hold it higher than your face, and you can't. And I was like, wow, the vibes are different at the Planning Commission. They let everyone speak. A lady rolled up as a giraffe. Yeah. They were signed.
You're saying it's punk rock at the Planning Commission.
There literally a guy with a red mohawk and The Clash tattoo on his arm who said he worked in the music business. And I leaned over to our intern and said, no shit.
I was going to say, and we should say shout out to our summer intern, because she was there with you the whole time.
Which she did not have to be. We're not hazing her. I kept telling her she could leave, and she was like, no, it's interesting. So shout out Anna.
Well, thanks for getting up this morning and coming to chat with us about it. People can read your story, as you said, on NashvilleBanner.com. We are available on the Banner & Company podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, and we're produced, as usual, by Andrea Tudhope. Thanks for listening. See you soon.